Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to this Robert Half series of webinars. We were just discussing, actually, myself, Matt and Katie, because it feels like we've been doing this forever now, but we're only 5 weeks in, and this is the 12th webinar that we presented. So I just want to sort of kick off with a massive thank you to Katie and Matt today, who are today's presenters, because having been a bit more involved in last week's Future of Work webinar, I know how much heavy lifting and work goes into putting these webinars together, with writing the content from scratch, understanding your content, and then presenting it. But you'll notice at the end of all of our webinars, we've encouraged you to give us some feedback. We've written to you to give us some feedback as well. And it's been kind of overwhelming, the number of clients that have written to us and said, we would love some help or some tips with how to sort of manage that balance between being at home and working, but being at home and being a mum, a dad, and a carer as well. So today's webinar is on working families. And we don't have all the answers. Katie and Matt are both parents. I don't think they're going to profess to have created utopia in their own homes. There's been many an evening I spoke to both of them, and they've both been ready to kick the cat or kick the dog themselves, but they're going to try and present some models, some frameworks, and some ideas to hopefully help with these tricky times. At the end as well, we're going to have a Q&A, I think, because this is such a sensitive and personal subject as well. We're going to open it up and let people speak rather than sort of have you sort of raise your hand or type in. So I look forward to that Q&A at the end. When we did it internally, I think the Q&A was as long as the webinar, so look forward to that. And then just lastly, to introduce our presenters today. So I'll probably start with our new presenter. Matt has been there sort of moving the slides and doing all the sort of logistics in the background, but as a working dad, we've got Mr. Matt Robinson today. Matt has been in the recruitment industry for the best part of 14 years, I think, and has travelled the globe in various different roles, different cities. His favourite of which was out in Sydney, but he saw sense and came to Robert Half 4 years ago, and started in our product deployment and adoption department, which has been a very apt skill set for us to have, as we spoke about last week, but more recently supports Katie as a manager in the learning and development team. As I said, Matt is a dad to Phyllis and Phoebe of 6 and 4 years of age. So he's definitely been through the mill over the last 7-8 weeks. So we'll hear Matt's story in a minute. And then lastly, with great pleasure, introduce Katie, who, if you've been on the webinar before, you all know by now, but Katie's been with the business for the best part of 20 years. 17 of which were very much like myself as an operational director, but the last 3 as a director within our learning and development team, covering the entire international zone outside of America. I've said it many a times, but Katie's sort of passion for people and landing in this sort of dream job for herself can be traced back before Robert Half, where she studied psychology at Bath, and was actually training to be a clinical psychologist before sort of Robert Half came her way. So Katie is a mum of 3. She's got twins as well. So I'll let Katie introduce the family herself. But without further ado, over to you, Katie.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks to everyone who's joined today. It's lovely, as I'm looking at the names coming through, to see some familiar names and, of course, some new names that are joining today. So what Matt and I are hoping to do today is really give you time to really explore what's working for you as a family right now. And, we all know these are unprecedented times, and I think, more than ever, we need to work out what is working for us and what is and what isn't, and maybe what can we do to make the balance, the juggle, feel more bearable, I guess. So as Steve said, I'm a working parent myself. I've got 3 children. I've got a 12-year-old daughter, Gracie, and I've got 10-year-old twins, boy and girl. My son's Max and my other daughter's Darcy. So like Matt, with Phyllis and Phoebe, our hands are full, and we hope that we will share firsthand today some of the challenges we faced with juggling, childcare, homeschool, our professional lives, and just the demands of keeping a home going, I guess. So I think everyone on this call, if you're not a parent, you may well be a carer of someone. I think the boundaries have become, between work and life have become ever less obvious and blurred. And for a lot of us, that's left us in survival mode. And, the reality is our well-being has had to have been pushed aside. And I think as we're going into week 8 of lockdown, we've all at times had moments where we felt overwhelmed, we've lost perspective, and at times probably lost ourselves. And, the reality is emotions are contagious, whether that's happiness, whether that's sadness, whether that's frustration. And I think that chemical cocktail of stress, cortisone, adrenaline, is pretty powerful stuff, right? And it affects our moods, our reactions, and sleep, and even our immunity. And we all know that is not good for us. So I guess the good news is you've made the time for yourself today. You've done an amazing job by carving out half an hour, 40 minutes today to make the call. And hopefully you will feel like that's an investment in yourself. And I guess I would ask yourself, if you can't invest in yourselves right now, when can you? So it's really important that you continue to do that where you can. But I guess really before we go into the slides, the only thing that Matt and I would really like to put out there is we are by no means perfect. We don't have all the answers. I guess no one does right now. But what I would say is we hope to just share some of the research we've come across, some of our personal experiences. And, when people think about what you want your children to remember, what do you want to remember about these times? I think Matt and I will just be happy if our kids can remember something apart from, shh, be quiet, we're on a webinar now. You need to come off the Wi-Fi. So, we, like I said, are by no means perfect. And we also understand that everyone's family looks and feels different. And we've tried to be as inclusive as we can today. But if we have overlooked a particular scenario, please forgive us. 30 minutes is not long to really cover everything. So at times we have been generic. But everything we cover today will work for you if you're a working family, you're working parents, if you're looking after elderly parents, generally if you've got care and responsibilities. But the focus will be on working parents, because that's something that Matt and I can talk about with confidence, I guess. So with that, I'm going to turn to really exploring family and career, and really the distinction between these two roles. And I think we'd all agree in the last 8 weeks, our role as parent, caregiver, employer is under more pressure than it ever has been before. And we're all spending 24 hours a day together in the same place with the same people. So every part of our lives are just linked into this one big ball of stuff now. And that's really tough when you're trying to manage your job, the potential stress of homeschool, and just the general realities of keeping everyone watered, fed, and hopefully still speaking to each other at the end of the day. So the first person we came across when we were looking at this was a famous British psychologist who probably did this work about 30 years ago, a guy called Donald Winnicott, a famous child psychologist. And he talks about the need to strive to not be perfect as a parent. He sort of socialized this idea of being a good enough parent. And what he talks about is you've got to come to terms with the fact that you're going to be imperfect as a parent. You are going to have failures. It's a part of life. And by doing that, it will take you to a better place and closer, hopefully, to happiness. And what he talks about is, most of us are probably recovering perfectionists in some elements, and that's really hard. But if we can move towards good enough parent, good enough employee right now in these unprecedented times where many of us are being asked to wear 3 or 4 hats at simultaneous times, that's a huge ask, and it is impossible to do all of it, perfectly. So by trying to manage our own expectations, or indeed dialing down those expectations, can really, really help. So I guess I would encourage you to ask yourselves, what does that look like for you right now? What does making it work for everyone at home look like for you? Because again, that will be different for everyone. I would encourage you to focus on the days that have worked versus the days that haven't worked so well, because when you tend to focus on the things that have worked well, you tend to see more opportunities, more silver linings. There's a lot of work by a guy called Sean Anker who speaks a lot about reframing, and his work is basically based on the fact of how you react to your experiences. And if you look for good, you tend to get good. If you look for bad, you tend to get bad. It's that whole kind of old saying of half glass full versus half glass empty. And really, we would encourage you to look at where it has worked, because that will help your own well-being. It will also make you feel more positive. And as I said earlier, emotions are contagious. Being more positive is contagious. And, you know, by widening the lens for yourself, for your employer, for your family, really help you see some silver linings. You know, something that I find as a parent, my children are 12 and 10 retrospectively, so they're a little bit older. I've been blown away by their independence of learning, how great they are on technology, and how resilient they are. You know, I know we speak a lot about the elderly, and I know we've done lots for, you know, clapping the NHS, and rightly so, but I do feel like our children have done an awesome job in adjusting to, you know, one day being at school with their friends and all of a sudden 8 weeks locked up at home. So, you know, for me, that's been a real silver lining, and those are life skills. They're really important things that will help them future, you know, in their future. Talking about Sean Anker's work a little bit more about reframing, I'm sure many of you on the call, I would be surprised if you haven't had moments of frustration, sadness, you know, wish that it could go back. And I'd be surprised if you hadn't had moments of joy. And what he talks about, and I'm going to give another example of myself here, is, you know, I found it very hard working from home with my children sitting opposite me at the kitchen table. The guilt that I felt as a working parent with them face to face with me versus them being at school is felt a lot more intense, let's say. And I was talking to my boss, a lady called Kathy Burton, about this, and she got me to reframe it. Although I'm really familiar with Sean's work, I couldn't do it to myself because I was so in the grip and so caught up in my own emotions of feeling guilty. And she got me to look at it differently. She got me to think about, what are your children learning from you right now? You know, they're old enough to see that you're working really hard, that you're trying to protect their safety, you know, personally and professionally. And it made me go from distress to just stress. And for me, that has really, really worked. So I think I would encourage all of you to look at how you're interpreting the experiences right now, because that impacts directly how we feel, how our well-being is. And the reality is, you know, everything is so mixed up. So it's so important that you take that step back to really evaluate things. And research would tell us it's much harder to do that if you're disorganized, if you are emotional, impatient, quick to judge, and very heavily reliant on past experiences. So what I would say is that ability to take time for yourself as a parent is so important, because you are not a superhero. You are not immune to feeling overwhelmed. You need time for yourself. And for everyone on this call, that will look differently. It could be exercise, it could be a bubble bath, it could be reading, you know, cuddling up and watching a movie, or, you know, I like a little bit of online shopping, which probably is not a good thing, but it certainly makes me feel better for the moment. So reflection is super important. And, you know, things are going to remain different for a while. You know, our lives have been transformed in the last 7-8 weeks. So we need to do what we can to support ourselves. I'm going to turn and talk to something called safety, mattering and belonging now. And it's something that I've used probably in pretty much all of the webinars that I've done. I use it in all of the coaching I do. For me, it's the fundamentals of what makes a good leader, and it's the fundamentals of what I try to use in my own parenting. And the reality is, COVID-19 has put pretty much everyone's basic needs in question, and our children, the people we care for, are no different. And everyone needs to feel safe, that they belong, and that they're contributing in some way. And our brains are neurologically hardwired to when a threat proposes itself, like the pandemic, to react in 3 very distinct ways. And those are fight, flight, and freeze. And the point that we, it's going to happen. It's something that scientifically happens in our brains. But the reality is, where we can control that is understanding what are the triggers that send us there. What are the telltale signs of when we're in the moment, in the grip of that? And also, what can we do to get ourselves out of it? And this is really important to learn about yourself, but also really important to learn about those that you care for. And, whether that's at home, or certainly if you're in a leadership position on the call, the team members that you're responsible for. So Christina Comerford's work, her book's called Smart Tribes, and I'd highly recommend it. Really gives some recommendations of how we might see this in every day. So fight, how that might look like in our children, for example, that might look like bad behavior, attention seeking, they're kind of looking for a conflict. In ourselves as parents, it might look like we're very snappy, frustrated, when you've been asked for the 110th time that day for a snack. Flight, that might be, and I've noticed this in my older daughter, they joke about a situation, they suddenly become a little bit smart, what I call a smart mouth, or they become sarcastic, and they withdraw from you a little bit. And, the reality is older children do need time alone to kind of work through their emotions and try and understand everything that's going on. In ourselves, it can show up again by us pulling away from our loved ones, perhaps maybe not trusting them the same way. So really look out for those signs, because that will tell you what they need from you. And if someone's in freeze situation, that might again show up in children by being 100% subservient, desperate to not let you down, really not wanting to upset you because they can see that you're under pressure and stress. It can also show physically in, sort of psychosomatic symptoms of headaches and tummy aches. And obviously that's really hard at the moment because, every time, certainly my children says anything to me, you're like, have you got a fever? Are you coughing? Because you obviously, we're in that kind of panic situation. For us, it could just be that we desperately want someone to make a decision for us. We want someone else to work out what you're having for dinner. You want someone else to make a decision. You kind of want to be a passenger, not the leader. And that is really a big thing, because the reality is our human brains don't work well with ambiguity. It fatigues us in a very different way, physically and emotionally, than anything else that we've probably experienced. So I think the key is, as I said, really identifying what that looks like for you and your families, and also your teammates, your work colleagues. But what she talks about is that is neurologically going to happen. Our job is to seek and find and create opportunities to nurture people's safety, mattering, and belonging. And in times like this, for me, I would recommend, talking to your children about their worries, talking to your loved ones about their worries, normalizing their experiences where you can. Now, I appreciate this varies massively if you're talking to a 4-year-old versus, a 16-year-old. So the delivery would change, but the content wouldn't necessarily. Talk to them about what things haven't changed, that you're still a family, you're all safe, and that you still love them. That's really important. I would say the belonging, remind them, tell them how happy you are that you're isolating with them together, talk to them about how you've enjoyed seeing them work at home, working on a school project or even a home project. And then mattering, highlight all their strengths that you're now seeing. And there will be some new strengths that we've all learned during this time. Everyone loves praise. Everyone loves feeling valued. And I think telling them how appreciated they are, what a difference they're making to your lockdown experience, really helps. And, I think this is where housework can come in, giving children some chores, little or small, whatever works for you as a family, really, gives them a sense of responsibility and makes them feel valued and part of the team. And let's be honest, if your house is anything like mine, it's got completely battered over the last 8 weeks. So to me, that's a win-win situation for everyone. But ultimately, for you as a parent, as a carer, as an employee, for you to be able to give everyone else what they need, you have to ultimately look after your own safety, mattering, and belonging. And you have to give yourself time, however that looks. having lunch together, make sure you schedule time for that, having putting the music on once work's finished and having a dance together, you know, as I said earlier, snuggling up and watching a movie together, or in my house it seems to be, you know, watching the new TikTok that they've, you know, decided to learn that day. So please work out what that is, because that will help you build your family's resilience during this time, and it will make you feel confident of what works for your family in this new world, and that in itself will just create hopefully a more harmonious atmosphere, but more importantly give you the confidence that you can do this, you can juggle it all, but you just need to give yourself some time too. So we're going to talk about now something called the personal change curve. Now this is typically we would use this in a leadership workshop, but I think it relates really well to working parents or people that are in a caring role, whether that's, as I said earlier, for elderly parents or you know, something similar. But this comes from a resilience guide for managers by two people, Cynthia Scott and a guy called Dennis Jaffe. And what they've put together here is, through years of research, they've studied people's reactions to change, basically. And what they talk about is they've discovered 4 distinct patterns and themes that you can see on the screen here, and we all have to move through these. It's a normal and necessary part of reacting and adapting to change, and managers, as well as leaders, as well as parents, can guide their loved ones, their employees, through the change curve. If we do that with empathy and patience, we will probably end up at stage 4 rather than being stuck in stage 2. So the 4 stages that you can see on here, the first one is denial, which, you know what, is pretty much what you would imagine. It's that feeling of shock, surprise that this can't be happening, you know, kind of putting your head in the sand and trying to minimize the impact. The resistance, stage 2, is really when reality sinks in. I kind of call it the fat middle. This is probably where it gets worse before it gets better, if maybe that's the right way to say it. You feel very apprehensive, you feel irritated, you can't believe what's happening. The third stage is exploration, which is really after that period of resistance and struggle, you start to potentially become a little bit more focused and positive on the future, what could be, what will be. And at this point, this is where you probably think or feel that you can not only survive this crisis or pandemic, but you can actually maybe start thinking and dreaming about thriving again. And then commitment, and commitment is where you're at the point of reimagination and reform, and you've kind of got that pathway, that hope for the future, really. So what we would ask you whilst you're on the call today is, where would you put yourself on that personal curve change? Because everyone's different. It doesn't mean you'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. It could mean that you go from 1 to 3 back to 1 to 2, because as we know, it's not a straight road. But really think about the things that are pushing you through that personal change curve, and what things are making you pause or get stuck in one of those stages. Because again, I think that will help you work out what you need to focus on for you and your loved ones. So with that, I'm going to pass over to Matt now, who's going to explore a little bit more around the personal change curve, and also help you maybe get a little bit more distinction between boundaries. So over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks very much. Hi, everybody. So just interesting, actually, just talking about what Katie was talking about with the personal change curve and how it relates to everybody. The interesting thing I wanted to talk about is my eldest daughter, actually, Phoebe, who is only 6. She is still in resistance mode. She's been in that phase for quite some time, and it's really, you know, as Katie was saying, we've got to try and talk, nurture our children to get through these things. But what I found is, and the way I've identified it, is that, you know, when things come on, like whether it's on a TV show or if it's the news that comes on and they mention COVID-19, the first thing she does is try and sort of refuse to listen. She wants it turned off and everything. So that's when I started noticing that, you know, for her, it was affecting her sort of mentally about the situation. So what I've been really trying to do, I wouldn't say I'm successful in every way with that, is talk to her about sharing her feelings, sharing her emotions, but also just talking to her through why it's good to talk about it and not just dismiss it, because that's going to help the acceptance come, and then obviously we can move forward with that personal change curve. But as Katie said, what we should be asking ourselves at the moment is, where are we on the change curve? And actually, focus and productivity often drop during times of turmoil. So now is a really good time to become equipped to help get yourself through the change curve. But it's also a good time to refresh your resiliency and maybe your personal leadership skills, so that you can guide, if you've got a team, guide your team through the crisis, obviously with your family, help them get through this, because this can be really effective to help use with your family. So just some tips that we've got that I would mention here about leading through this is obviously remaining calm. It's not always easy. I know how challenging it can be with young children. So try and stay calm when possible, but also listen with empathy. Sometimes I know as a busy parent, we haven't necessarily got our listening ears on, which I talk to my children about having all the time. But try and listen with empathy. Try and hear exactly what is being said. Also, to focus on short-term directives, again, with family members, with children, with your teams, if it is, having short-term directives is actually really good, rather than focusing on the long term, because I can quite honestly say each week, and I've talked to Katie about this, when we have our catch-ups, each week in this has been so different. It's felt like it's been a month as opposed to a week. So focusing on short term is really good. But be simple, clear, prescriptive when possible, so that people really understand what it is that you're trying to achieve, but also provide a confident and hopeful view of the future. And again, relating that back to children, being positive, being confident that this is obviously, things will adapt, things will get better, is going to help them get through that. But things that I would suggest here is actually ask yourself the following. I think it's really important to think about how you want to remember this time as a working parent. I mean, I know that I want to remember this time as positively as possible. I know it's a tough situation to be in, but I want to really think that, we've got through this. It was difficult, but we've got through the challenge. But I also want to reflect on the fact that it was okay not to be perfect. I think sometimes we put so much pressure on ourselves to be perfect in every role that we play, that actually sometimes it's okay to let go of that. The big question for me is, though, what do you want your kids to learn during this time? So I want them to learn maybe a bit of resilience. I want them to see how hard that we have worked as parents to keep things going as normal as possible, that we're trying to keep on top of things, and that sometimes, sacrifices have to be made, and that, you can't always have things your own way, or can't always have everything happening immediately. I know I've gone through that, but actually for my children, I want them to realize that, it's tough, and they've got to have some resilience to this. But then also think about, what are the actions that you can take now to align yourself with this vision. Again, research has shown that being able to plan more effectively where possible, it's going to help you to have those conversations, and to help your children, your family, your teams, to understand how we can achieve that vision together. But also, what do you have to let go of or worry less about to align with this vision? And something I'm going to talk about in a second is really letting go of your perfection and focusing more on the things that you can influence. But the things that I want to think about is being a role model. How I show up is really important. I want my children to see that I've been hard working through this. I haven't just sat back on my laurels and just waited for things to happen. That I am really working hard to keep the family safe, but also financially safe by working as hard as I can. So as I mentioned, letting go of perfection. Bad days will happen, and interruptions are going to happen. And I think one of the key things and questions to ask yourself around this is, what are you expecting from yourself at this moment? It's not just about achieving in the roles that you play, but maybe ask yourself, how do you want to be in each of these roles? Parent, career, as Katie was alluding to earlier. And how can you be realistic in what you are expecting of yourself? And maybe write this down and have visual cues to remind you of them. I know that I have things up around my desk. There's pictures that my kids have drawn. There's sort of ideas about what I want to do, how I'm going to achieve them, and everything. I think it's a good thing. But also, there are some things you can do to support yourself, and hopefully one or two of these things might resonate with you, to help you through this. So, think about where you might need to dial down your expectations a little bit. You know, on different days, do you need to prioritize things maybe a bit differently? Because, you know, keeping on top of all of this at the same time is going to be very difficult and probably unrealistic. And that is going to lead to that feeling of overwhelm. So, you know, what might be good enough for you and how can you manage it? And I would say, don't hang on to negative feelings, name it, take action, make a decision and move on. You know, let go of it, don't carry it around with you. But also, excuse me, accept that you will get things wrong, and use your business critical thinking skills to assess, you know, your effectiveness, and lean into your competence and make adjustments and changes. But be safe in the knowledge that it's okay not to be perfect. So in order to create the right balance, there are some practical things that you can apply and maybe some slight changes which will make things work easier for you and your family. And they don't have to always be big changes. They can be small things. And I know there are parts of your day that may have you feeling dread. I know going on things like these webinars, it's, you know, big conference calls and so forth, knowing that the children are around, it could be quite noisy. Okay, that, you know, sometimes that fills me with dread. Alternatively, there are times when, you know, you're looking forward to things such as, you know, for me, being able to have lunch with the family, all of us together around the same table is fantastic. You know, also those end of work drinks or chats where it's okay if the children pop in and out, you know, those are things that I look forward to. But also identifying the particular parts of the days where it's a bit more difficult, that can be useful in focusing, where you can make a few little changes. So think about what is your daily routine and ask yourself, you know, what is required during the day, remembering that every day is going to be different. But what is the thing that everybody needs? And, you know, having that conversation with your boss, your partner, your children, you know, if they're old enough, about what has worked well the day before and what, you know, you might want to do going forward. How is it going to work in that positive way? There are also lots of physical things that you can do to help you prioritize being the parent that you want to be when you can be. You know, from a work perspective, we say put on your work clothes, have a sign up on your desk or a closed door if you've got that to say that you're working. But also, one of the things that I found has worked really well is having some downtime in the transition between work and family. You know, most of us would have normally a commute to work where you've got time to, you know, unwind from the daily pressure of your job. You listen to music, reading a book. You know, you can still do this. I think after breakfast, I tend to come into my room here. I don't just log on and go straight to emails. What I'll do is, you know, sometimes read the news or something, but have that little mini break just to transition between family life and work can be really useful. But also stick to your committed hours. You know, from a family perspective, they need to know that, you know, obviously we have KPIs that we need to achieve. That hasn't changed. We still need to do that. But, you know, letting them know that these are the hours that you need to work, you know, your family will understand. But also setting out or planning your day and explaining to your family when you're free to do the fun things, you know, when can we go for a walk, when we can have a kickabout and so forth, you know, and also committing to that and sticking to that would be really key. But it's all about allowing you to play the role that's important to you at that given time of day, which is going to allow you to focus on your priorities and that given time. And that's what you're trying to do. It's separating things out to avoid that feeling of everything being thrown together and feeling overwhelmed. And I think just being flexible here is also key. You know, some things might have to change based on something urgent coming in. Okay, but, you know, just making sure that you're aware of that and that you can deal with that in that manner. So what I want to finish off on here before I hand back to Katie are just some tips that we've sort of researched. We've got them on our Robert Half website, which you'll have a link to afterwards. But the first thing I would mention is creating and maintaining a dedicated workspace. Now, I know, you know, we're sort of in week 8, I think, of lockdown now. We've probably sort of nailed that, but it is important to separate your working life from your home life. And, you know, that's especially true when you've got children here. So it does create that sense of mental separation for you as an adult. And I think, you know, when we mix our working environment with the rest of your home, it's easier for you to feel as though you're always at work. So having that dedicated workspace, you know, stops that blur between the two. I think setting your work hours, as I mentioned, and sticking to them, you know, children need routine. we need routine, especially now we're working from home. So it's much more likely that, that conference call in the morning will pass without interruption if your children know that, or, your parents know, etc., that at lunchtime, you're going to be able to focus on their attention at that point. But maintaining business hours where possible, but sometimes having the flexibility to recognize where you can have gaps in the day. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to work 9 to 5. I know for me, sometimes work hours can be any time between 6 in the morning till 10 at night, but knowing when those gaps are available for you to actually help you spend time with your family and so forth is going to really help. I think setting realistic expectations early as well, for colleagues and for your family, being upfront on your challenges and the limitations that you're facing at home can help your teams to help work around things, help work more efficiently with this. And, the distractions and interruptions that can come with working from home and your children, making your colleagues know that that could happen, it's going to really help. But also your children need to have clear expectations of their days as well. So again, explaining to them that, I need to focus on my work. Okay, that's going to help them know what is expected of them as well. And then finally, beginning the day with a family meeting, it's not always enough to explain just once to children what's expected of them. So beginning each day fresh is a good opportunity to set your expectations, explain the schedule, but also foster that sense of togetherness. I'd like to say do that over a family breakfast. I can categorically tell you I don't do this all the time. When I've tried, it doesn't always work out, but I really try my best to make a plan with my children. Even though they're small, it really helps them to sort of hear what I'm doing, but also have a chance to speak to me as well. And then finally, as I mentioned, letting go of perfection. Now is not the time to try and maintain high standards that you had. You can accept that things are going to be a bit different. But what I'd like to leave you on is really overarching all of this. Ask yourself, right now, what does success look like? I find that sometimes, as I said, drawing and keeping that information up on my wall can help ease my mood when I'm having a particularly stressful time. But I would really think, what does it look like right now? I can't be perfect. I'm not going to get everything right, but what's going to work for me? So with that, I'm just going to hand back over to you, Katie.
Thanks, Matt. So this is the last slide. So, thank you for bearing with us. I know we're running a little bit over the half an hour, but as you can imagine, it's such a big topic, and we had so much that we wanted to share. But what I want to really talk about on the last slide is something that I actually went on a webinar myself, probably about 4 weeks ago now, and this was referenced in the webinar that I went on, and it really resonated with me. And I kind of, maybe it's a little bit self-indulgent, but I really wanted to share this with you as well, because hopefully it will resonate similarly. But basically, it's the work by a lady called Mia Campbell-Pringle, and she talks about the needs of children. And obviously, we've spoken a lot today about the different varying needs of children. But what she talks about is she did, years of research really looking at what children fundamentally need. And in all of her research, she discovered that they actually only need 4 things. And I'm having trouble with my slides, guys, getting this slide up for you now. So apologies, I'll keep talking through it and hopefully it'll come through. But what it taught, oh, there you go, perfect. And what she talks about are the 4 things, and they're up on the screen here. Love and security, responsibility, praise and recognition, and new experiences. And what I would hope when I heard this, it was like, okay, I can do that. I do that. I can do that most days. And what it gave me was the simplicity of probably what we actually fundamentally really need to do. And this time is a very unique time where all of our roles are merged. But if you can do these 4 things, then what we're doing is absolutely good enough. And, love and security, sounds pretty obvious, right? We all know that children, our loved ones, the people we care for, need love, but actually we need to show them, we need to make them feel it. So whether that's more cuddles, that physical side of love, whether it's that smile to each other as you're working across the table, that really helps nurture that feeling of safety, mattering and belonging. the next one around responsibility, you know, I said earlier, giving, you know, everyone having a role to play, everyone having something that they're responsible for makes everyone feel valued. And that helps again with that need of safety, mattering and belonging. Praise and recognition, you know, this works for everyone and certainly children of all ages, but you know, it goes a long way, and all our children are struggling, our loved ones are struggling. You know, take a moment if you see your teenager in the middle of their virtual classrooms, you know, give them some praise on how well they've adapted to, you know, learning remotely, how brilliant they are at technology. And you know, if they're younger children, you know, just looking at their work with them and giving them the thumbs up, it goes such a long way. Those things mean everything right now. And then lastly, new experiences. And you know, new experiences right now are very different to pre-COVID, you know, and they're quite difficult to pull out right now. When I floated this idea with my children about new experiences, they were like, yeah, we prefer the experiences we had before this, mummy. It was much better than staying in and, you know, the highlight of the day being a walk. But what they have seen is a new way of looking at things, you know, the way that they see the world now in terms of, you know, the privilege that they have had, and how lucky they are. So, you know, that new experiences is super important too. And like I said, although it is in a different vein, it is there if you look for it. So hopefully by sharing that, it will make you feel that you are doing a brilliant job, and give you some hope that you are providing your children with indeed what they need. And, you know, lean into that, believe in that, and that will help you find the way that works for you and your family. And I came across something yesterday, a quote by Simon Sinek, who I'm sure many of you know, and he put this quote up and I thought it summarized this webinar beautifully, so I'm going to end with it today. But he put, so remember, better is better than being best. Striving to be best is impossible. Striving to be better each day is possible and more rewarding. So I hope that has been useful. I appreciate that you've given us the 40 minutes today. I know how valuable everyone's time is. You know, we'd love to wish you, your families, your loved ones all the best, and please continue to take good care of yourself and them. And with that, I'll pass back to Steve, who will open up for any questions and end the webinar today. But again, thank you for listening.
Brilliant. Thanks, Katie, and thanks, Matt, as well. I think that was Matt's first webinar, wasn't it, Matt? Was that the first one that you've done?
It was the first one, yes.
You would never tell. What a debut. Brilliant. No, I think it was such a poignant and such a relevant topic, and I've noticed yet again that you tweaked a few things since you gave myself a little bit of an insight into since Monday. So brilliant job. Really, really well done. So we're open for questions now, guys. So please don't be shy. I know when the first one came in on Monday internally, like I said, we took another half an hour of questions. But just while I'm letting you collate your thoughts, just to let you know that next Wednesday, so webinar Wednesdays is the new thing now. I think we were doing 2 a week, and bless Katie and Matt, I think they were kind of running out of ink in their pens writing content. So we're going to repeat the Future of Work webinar 3 o'clock on Wednesday next week, for those who maybe missed it first time around, because there's quite a lot of feedback around could we hear it again. Yeah, with that, Matt, before we wrap up, anyone sort of got their hand up or looking to ask a question?
Not yet, I don't know. Just to say, if you do want to ask a question, if you could go to the participants tab, you will see that you can raise your hand. If you want to do that, I can unmute your phone line, and if you want to ask a question, that's fine.
And also, again, feedback that we've had, and I've said this before for those of you that are tuning in for the first time, but the minute that we start the Q&A and someone puts their hand up down at the bottom, we'll stop the recording as well, just so that any sensitive or quite close to home questions don't get recorded and moved around on the web, etc. But we'll give it a minute. Anyone coming through, Matt?
No questions.
No questions.
Oh, hang on, we do. We have one. Nadine Grant. I'm just going to stop the recording first so that we've done that. Bear with me. Let's have a look.